She thought he was just a lone wanderer, a shadow passing through the valley, but he held title to the very mountains that watched over her and carried a grief that had hollowed him for years. You look like you could use a strong drink or a guiding hand. Ilera started, nearly dropping the faded map she was poring over. She squinted through the dim light of the flickering lantern. The old bunkhouse, usually her sanctuary, felt suddenly small, the silence broken by the unexpected voice. She spun toward and saw him, tall, cloaked in the shadows of the doorway, a presence that seemed as ancient and unyielding as the peaks outside. He wore a rough-spun coat pulled tight against the chill, and a wide brim had obscured his eyes, but she felt their gaze. She straightened her back, gripping the map. Depends on which one you're offering. The man gave a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, I left my distillery in the last ghost town, but I'm decent with timber and trails if you got those too. Ilera hesitated. The snow outside was beginning to fall in earnest, already blanketing the winding path to her main cabin. Her old two-way radio was crackling with static, and she was still miles from the nearest town. The howl of a lone wolf echoed through the valley. The main support beam in the North Trail Lodge gave way, she muttered. Or maybe the foundations shifted. I'm no expert. Mind if I take a look? He asked, stepping fully into the lamplight. He moved with quiet authority. No rush, no swagger, just steady steps that crunched softly on the worn wooden floor. He set a battered canvas pack down, pulled out a thick leather glove, and leaned over the crude diagram of the lodge's structure, like he'd built it himself 100 times. Ilera crossed her arms. What's your name? Caleb. Just Caleb. He looked up briefly, his eyes a startling shade of gray. That's what I go by. She gave a short nod, unsure if that answer satisfied her. He worked in silence for a few minutes, tracing lines on the map, running a callous thumb over the indicated weak points. The moon began to cast long, eerie shadows across the bunkhouse floor. You live around here? She asked, mostly to fill the silence. He shook his head. Just passing through. You from these mountains? Close enough to know their breath, far enough not to claim them. Ilera didn't know what that meant, but something about the way he said it made her stop pressing. After 15 minutes, he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up at her. She'll need more than a patch job. The main joists are rotted. I figured, she sighed. There's an old sawmill a few miles north. Mine. Got some spare lumber and a larger truck there. If you can help me haul it, I'll feed you dinner. Caleb inclined his head slightly. Deal. It took another hour to hitch the heavy lumber to her truck and get her sparse gear loaded into his pack. She followed him on foot for a while until he insisted she ride in the truck. She climbed in, awkward but grateful. Try not to lean too close, but the night air was turning bitter cold. When they reached the edge of her land, the old wooden sign greeted them, nearly hidden by fresh snow. Whispering Peaks Ranch, 1962. The lights from the main cabin glowed soft and warm against the deepening twilight. The scent of pine and wood smoke hung heavy in the air. Caleb led them to the main cabin and helped unload everything in silence. You any good with tools? Ilera asked as they piled the lumber. Depends on the job. I've got a leaky roof and a stable door that won't close properly. If you're looking for work, he glanced at her. Just a few days and I'll move on. She nodded. Just a few days. Later that night, Ilera set a plate of venison stew and freshly baked bread on the table inside the small kitchen. Caleb sat across from her, freshly showered, but still in those weather-beaten clothes. He ate like someone who was grateful, not starving, and never once asked for more than she offered. She watched him from over her glass. You ever settle anywhere? He shook his head. Not in a long time. Running from something. Running toward peace, he said simply. That answer caught her off guard. The wind outside picked up, brushing the window panes with soft fingers. The night settled around them in a hush. They spoke little after that. She offered him the spare room in the old annex building beside the main cabin. He accepted, thanked her, and stepped out into the moonlight. Ilera locked the door behind him, her brow furrowed. There was something about him, calm but distant, Kind but closed off. A lone wanderer, she thought. One of the old kind. She shook her head, poured herself another glass of water, and turned off the lights. But sometime just before dawn, a splintering crash shattered the quiet. Ilara bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, her 2 hunting dogs were barking furiously. She grabbed the old hunting rifle by the door, threw on her boots, and ran toward the North Trail Lodge. She'd barely made it halfway before she saw them. 3 figures in shadows moving fast. One already inside the lodge. One of the windows was smashed. Then came the sound of fists, grunting, a body hit in the wall. She raised a rifle, trembling, but then saw movement at the side. Caleb. He moved like lightning, grabbing one of the intruders by the collar and slamming him against the main support beam. The man dropped. Another charged him. But Caleb sidestepped, drove a punch into his ribs, then swept his legs from under him in a move that was too fluid to be a simple brawl, too clean to be drunk luck. The third man took one look at Caleb and ran. By the time Ilara reached the scene, Caleb was checking the integrity of the lodge walls, calming the dogs. "You okay?" she gasped. "Better question for them," he replied, nodding toward the 2 groaning men on the ground. She stared at him, stunned. "Who are you?" He met her gaze. Just Caleb. But Ilara wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Caleb worked with his sleeves rolled and his words few. By mid-morning the next day, he had already shored up the damaged joists, replaced the shattered window, and even fixed the stubborn stable door. Ilara watched him from a distance, chewing on the end of a pencil as she sat on the porch steps with her ledger forgotten in her lap. She had seen seasoned woodsmen buckle under the weight of a stubborn beam or curse their way through a simple repair. But Caleb moved with a quiet rhythm, like he had nothing to prove. His hands were steady, precise, callous, but not careless. He didn't rush. He didn't brag. He just fixed. And that unsettled her more than the break in the night before. Ilara waited until the last nail was hammered in before approaching. He wiped his brow, turned toward her like he already knew she was there. "Thanks," she said, "for last night." He nodded. "You get much trouble out here?" Sometimes land like this tend to draw interest, especially from people who want to take what they didn't earn. Caleb didn't reply, just walked toward the water pump and splashed water on his face. "You ever learn how to throw someone like that in a bar fight?" she asked, folding her arms. Caleb looked up, water dripping from his jawline. "Not exactly." "You move like someone trained," she said. "Nothing." She stepped closer. "You know, it's real hard to trust someone who won't tell you a damn thing about themselves." He dried his face with a rag and looked at her evenly. "You trust me enough to let me stay?" That was before you started breaking ribs in the dark like some ex-Special Forces operative. He almost smiled. "Almost. I told you, just Caleb. And I told you that doesn't fly here. You're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" Caleb looked out over the snow-dusted peaks, the crisp air biting at his exposed skin. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes people lose things," he said softly, "and they don't want to talk about them." Ilara's jaw tensed, but something in his voice, some crack just barely there, gave her pause. She nodded once. "Well, you're in a few more nights. That's all I'm saying." He gave her a small nod. "That's all I need." Over the next few days, Caleb fell into a rhythm on the ranch. He was up before sunrise, helped with trail maintenance, patched a section of the cabin roof that had been sagging for months, and even managed to calm Ilara's most difficult pack mule, Spirit, with nothing but a low whistle and steady hands. Ilara, for her part, kept trying to puzzle him out. She asked questions in passing. Where he grew up, what brought him west, if he'd ever guided professionally. But every answer was vague, carefully worded, as if he was building a wall even as he walked beside her. One night, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from amber to deep blue. Ilara broke the silence first. "My dad used to say, land was only as good as the man willing to stay and work it." Caleb nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "You believe that?" she asked. "I believe land remembers the hands that build it and the feet that run from it." She tilted her head. "And which are you?" He looked at her then, really looked. Eyes shadowed but honest. I used to build. Then I ran, still figuring out which one wins in the end. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alara asked, "You good with animals because you love them or because they listen better than people?" Caleb chuckled softly. "Little of both." Alara smiled. "You ever think about staying in one place?" His eyes didn't leave the mountains. "Sometimes. You ever think about staying here?" He turned to her, slower this time. "Would it matter if I did?" She blinked, her chest tightened. "I don't let people in easy," she said quietly. "Me neither." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. No declarations, no promises, just two people who had learned to survive the hard way, wondering if maybe this time was different. Then in the distance, the sound of a snowmobile rumbled over the winding mountain road. Alara stood, tension snapping back into her shoulders. "That's Marcus." Caleb watched her face change. "Problem?" She nodded grimly. "Big one." And just like that, the calm they'd built was about to be tested. The snowmobile pulled up in a cloud of disturbed snow, its engine growling low like a warning. Alara stood frozen on the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, jaw locked in a way Caleb hadn't yet seen. Marcus stepped off the machine like he owned the land beneath him. Same as always. He was tall, clean-cut, and wore a tailored-down jacket that didn't belong anywhere near raw timber. His smile was wide, practiced, polished. Caleb didn't like him instantly. "Alara," Marcus said, walking toward the porch like he'd been invited. "Long time no see. Heard your lodge had a little structural issue. Thought I'd swing by, lend a hand." Alara's voice was flat. "Too late. Someone already helped." Marcus's eyes flicked to Caleb, who leaned against the porch post with casual indifference, but sharp eyes. Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. He didn't need to. Marcus's smile twitched. "Friend of yours." Caleb didn't respond. Alara stepped in. "He's helping around the ranch. That's all you need to know." Marcus chuckled, turning back to her. "Is that so? I figured after what happened, you'd be ready to talk business. The offer still stands." "It never stood, Marcus." Alara snapped. "You just keep pretending it did." He tilted his head. "Mock hurt. Come on now. You know you can't keep this place afloat forever. You're a heartbeat away from losing your permits, and I've got the means to fix that. I'm not selling." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You sure about that? Because next time I might not come asking." Caleb straightened then. "You threatening her?" Marcus turned. "Excuse me." Caleb walked slowly down the steps, calm, controlled. "You came uninvited. You're pushing. I call that a threat." Marcus took a half step back, caught himself. "You don't know who you're talking to." Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No, but I know the type." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "This ain't your business, wanderer." Caleb's voice dropped. "It is now." Alara stepped between them. "That's enough, both of you." Marcus took another breath, trying to recover his arrogance. "You'll regret this, Alara. You always do." He turned, walked back to his snowmobile, and peeled off down the mountain road, flinging snow behind him. Caleb watched until the snow settled. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Alara nodded, but her fists were still clenched. "He's not going to stop." Caleb looked out across the land, his jaw tense. "Then neither will I." That night, Alara barely slept. She checked the locks twice, walked the perimeter of the lodge by flashlight, and jumped at every sound the wind carried. Caleb sat in the main cabin, cleaning and oiling an old hunting knife with slow, steady strokes, his eyes fixed on the door. It wasn't until just past midnight that it happened. A metallic clang. The dog started barking frantically. Alara was already running as Caleb burst from the cabin, moving with frightening precision. Two men in dark parkas were halfway through prying open the shed door when he tackled the first one, driving him into the ground. The second man pulled a small hatchet and swung. Caleb ducked, countered, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted until the weapon dropped. One punch, two. The man was out cold. Alara arrived with the rifle, panting. "You good?" she asked. Caleb nodded, breathing hard but steady. They weren't pros, just hired hands. "Marcus?" she spat. Caleb knelt beside one of the men, checked his pockets, and pulled out a folded note. No name, just a crudely drawn map of her property, and a location of her small gold panning claim marked with a red X. Ilera felt her blood run cold. They were going to sabotage the panning operation, she whispered. Ruin the claim, damage the ranch's reputation. Caleb stood, his eyes narrowing. He's not just trying to scare you. He's trying to dismantle you piece by piece. Ilera felt something shift inside her. "I can't do this alone," she said. "You're not," Caleb replied. The next morning, Ilera found him reinforcing the shed doors with fresh timbers. She brought him coffee, silent for a moment before saying, "You didn't even hesitate last night." Caleb looked at her, his hands still dirty. "Didn't need to. You've done this before." His silence was answer enough. "Why do you hide it?" she asked. "Because the last time I fought for something," he said slowly, "I lost more than I gained." She swallowed. "And this time—" He looked at her, his eyes softer, still figuring that out. She placed a mug on the fence post beside him. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here." He nodded. "So am I?" But in the back of her mind, Ilera knew Marcus wasn't finished, and Caleb was starting to look less like a wanderer and more like someone trained to survive much worse. It started with a box, an old dusty one, shoved into the back of the small loft above the stable, behind a tangle of worn harnesses and broken tack. Ilera hadn't meant to find it. She was searching for extra feed bags and nearly tripped over it. The box was heavy, metal corners, a rusted latch. And when she flipped it open, a cloud of old stable dust filled her lungs. Inside were papers, dozens of them, neatly folded documents yellowed at the edges, tied with a leather strap, and on top, an envelope with a name CD, Thorne written in elegant, precise script. She froze. C.D. Thorne. It wasn't a name she heard often, but she remembered it. Everyone did. Years ago, it had been all over the news. Caleb D. Thorne, the visionary behind the largest land development and mining acquisitions in the region, the man who had quietly amassed an empire by the age of 35 and then disappeared. Vanished, they said, after his family was killed in a private helicopter crash en route to a charity event. Rumors flew. Grief, scandal, guilt, betrayal. Some claimed he lost everything in a silent buyout. Others whispered he had staged his own death. Ilera stared at the envelope, then pulled the documents free. Titles, deeds, trust papers, and legal letters. Most bore his signature, Caleb. But not just Caleb. Her heart raced. She climbed down the ladder, her hands shaking, and went straight to the cabin. She needed confirmation. She powered up her old satellite laptop, Googled the name, and there he was, a younger version, clean-shaven, sharper around the edges, dressed in suits worth more than her entire ranch. But the eyes were the same. It was him, Caleb D. Thorne, the man who had owned half the mountains, the man sleeping in her annex, the man who hadn't truly lived in years. She found him in the forest later that evening, checking the old trapline with one of the younger wolfhounds trailing behind him like a shadow. He looked up as she approached, reading her face before she said a word. "You found it," he said quietly. Ilera didn't answer. She just stood there, papers in hand, betrayal in her voice. "You lied to me." Caleb exhaled slowly. "I didn't lie, I just didn't tell. You let me believe you were some wandering woodsman, some drifter with a quiet past and a few regrets. You let me trust you." "I never asked you to," he said, not unkindly. "But you knew I did." He nodded. "Yes." Ilera paced, her voice shaking. "You're Caleb Thorne. You're the guy who disappeared after his empire crumbled." "It didn't crumble," he replied. "I walked away from it." She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Why?" He paused. "Because I built something I thought would change the world. And when the world broke it, I didn't have anything left but silence." She didn't speak. The wind blew softly around them, stirring the dry pine needles. Caleb stepped closer. "I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be someone else for a little while. Somewhere people didn't see money or legacy or failure. They saw a man with a hammer and a horse, she said, her voice bitter. And you let them. I let you, Caleb. Ilera looked down, the papers trembling in her hands. You said you were running toward peace. But you're still running, Caleb. Even here. I know, he said, and I'm sorry. She looked up, tears burning. I don't care who you were, but I cared who I thought you were. I'm still him, he whispered. She shook her head. I don't know who you are anymore. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the fading light, nothing in his hands but regret. Behind him, the wolfhound let out a soft whimper. Caleb didn't move, because for the first time in years, he realized what it meant to be seen and what it cost to hide. Ilera left before sunrise. She did not leave a note. She did not look back. The box of documents sat untouched on the kitchen table, a silent monument to everything she thought she knew and all she now questioned. She packed only a small rucksack and drove her old snowmobile into the nearest town, needing space, needing air, needing something that was not Caleb Thorne. She hated that name because it meant everything she felt. Every flicker of trust, of connection, was built on a half-truth. The man who mended her lodge and calmed her skittish mules in silence wasn't just Caleb. He was a millionaire in hiding, a man with more power than he let on, a man who had been watching the world from behind shadows and letting her believe he had none. At the edge of town, she booked a room at a small, rustic lodge and tried not to think, but the silence was heavier there than it had been in the mountains. Later that day, she walked past a general store on Main Street and paused when she heard her name whisper behind her. Ilera, you seen the news? She turned to find an older prospector she vaguely recognized, Old Man Fitz. He held up a crumpled local newspaper. 2 more mining claims pressured to sell. Marcus Sterling expands development footprint. She snatched it from his hand. The headline was bad. The article was worse. Marcus Sterling, her ex-financier, was buying up land fast, too fast. Every family who had received one of his offers had either left town quietly or fallen into legal battles they couldn't afford. He wasn't just threatening now. He was executing. The last line made her stomach twist. Executing with no resistance. Sterling Holdings expects to break ground within 3 months on the northern edge of Whispering Peaks, her land, her home. The puzzle pieces snapped together. The pressure, the threats, the break-in, the targeted attacks. Marcus wasn't just coming for her. He was sweeping the valley, choking the life out of it one deed at a time, and she had walked away from the only man who could stop him. That night, the wind whipped hard outside her motel window. Ilera sat at the small desk, staring at the folded newspaper beside her untouched dinner. Every memory of Caleb swirled in her head. His quiet strength, the way he always rose at dawn, the scars on his knuckles, the sorrow behind his eyes. He hadn't lied to hurt her. He had hidden to protect what little of himself was left. And she had run, not because he wasn't who he said he was, but because deep down he had become someone she might love, and that terrified her. But now love wasn't the point. Marcus was winning, and Ilera needed someone who didn't just care, but could fight. At dawn, she drove back. The ranch was quiet. The front gate stood open. The air smelled of pine and snow, and something deeper, something like returning. She found him in the stable. Caleb was brushing down one of the colts, sleeves rolled, his movement steady, as if nothing had broken between them. She didn't speak at first, just stood there watching. He turned, and when their eyes met, there was no anger, no demand, only waiting. I read the news, she said. He nodded. He's moving faster than we thought. I know. She stepped closer. I walked away. I know that, too. There was a long pause. Her throat tightened. I didn't come back for an apology or an explanation. Caleb looked at her carefully. Then why did you? Because I need you, she said. Not just a man with a hammer and a soft voice. I need Caleb Thorne, the man who built half the mountains, the man who can stop Marcus before he burns it all to the ground. His eyes softened. Are you sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said, except that you never stopped fighting. even when no one saw it. He stepped forward. And I never stopped wanting to protect this place, or you. Alara blinked back tears. So what do we do now? She asked. Caleb picked up a folder from a bench. A legal file marked in bold. Sterling Holdings, LLC. We make a plan, he said, and then we make it loud. Together, they walked out into the morning light. Marcus had power, but they had purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to win. 3 days later, the old community hall in town was packed. Caleb stood at the front, sleeves rolled, his voice low but clear. A large easel behind him displayed maps, deeds, and a trail of connections, names of shell corporations, complex land transfers, and financial footprints that led inevitably to one man, Marcus Sterling. Alara stood beside him, scanning the crowd. Prospectors, trappers, lodge owners, some angry, some scared, all tired of being quiet. I know I haven't given you reason to trust me, Caleb said. But you all know Marcus's offer isn't business, it's pressure. You've seen it, felt it. I've seen what happens when men like him go unchecked, and I'm done watching. He held up a packet of documents. These are legal filings for an injunction. I'll cover the costs. You just need to stand with us. The room was still. Then an older woman, Maud, who ran the local general store, raised her hand. You really Thorne? The Thorne? Caleb nodded. Yes, ma'am. Then why help us now? He paused. Because I didn't before and I should have. A murmur ran through the room. One by one, people nodded, then stood. By the end of the hour, 25 signatures sat on the paperwork. Enough to stall Marcus's project, but they all knew he wouldn't take that lying down. That night, Caleb paced the main cabin. Phone pressed his ear. Yeah, we filed. Injunction hits first thing in the morning, he said, which means Marcus is out of options unless he uses force. He hung up. Alara stood in the doorway. You think he'll show? Caleb nodded. He has to. At midnight, the sound of snowmobile engines cut through the silence. Alara's stomach dropped. They're here. Caleb handed her a powerful headlamp and a two-way radio. Go out the back. Call Sheriff Hayes. Tell him what's happening. I'm not leaving you. I'm not asking, he said. But she didn't move. Caleb exhaled. Then stay close. They slipped out into the shadows. Headlights flared on the other side of the valley. At least 3 snowmobiles. Figures jumped out, flashlights sweeping the land. Marcus's voice rang out, cold and cocky. Thorne, come on out. We both know this land doesn't mean a damn thing without blood on it. Caleb stepped into view, a sturdy timber axe lowered but ready. You made your move. Now back off. Marcus snarled. You think paperwork's going to stop me? No, Caleb said, but witnesses will. The distant wail of sirens echoed through the mountains. Marcus cursed. You called the cops. Caleb's grip tightened. No, Alara did. Marcus turned just as she stepped out behind him, rifle aimed. Back away, Marcus. He lunged. A gunshot cracked through the night. Marcus dropped to one knee. Clutching his side, his men scattered into the dark. Alara ran to Caleb, heart racing. You okay? He nodded, though a gash bled from his temple. Close enough. Sheriff Hayes' cruisers tore down the road seconds later, blue and red lights slicing through the snow. Marcus was arrested on the spot. Unregistered weapons, attempted assault, trespassing. The deputies didn't need convincing. By the time the sun rose over whispering peaks, the legal fight had just begun. But the worst of the war was over, and they had won the first battle together. Caleb was slower on his feet for the next week. The gash above his temple was stitched, the bruised ribs bandaged, but Alara could tell pain had a way of settling into more than just muscle. She noticed it in the way he stood a little too long at the forest edge, watching the wind tug at the snow-laden branches. In the quiet sighs he let slip when he thought she wasn't looking. But he never complained, and she never left his side. They worked in rhythm again, like nothing had broken between them. Feeding the pack mules, walking the trails, tending to the small greenhouse behind the cabin. But there was something gentler now in their silence, something understood. One evening, As the sun slipped behind the highest peaks and painted the sky in warm streaks of peach and rose, Ilara found him sitting by the campfire, carving a small wooden animal with slow, steady strokes. "You're going to make that chipmunk famous," she said with a soft smile. "He deserves it," Caleb replied, running his thumb over the carved wood. "We all do once in a while." Ilara joined him on the log, folding her hands in her lap. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. Every day. He looked over at her, eyes steady. "I used to think I was built for building things. Deals, projects, empires. But lately," he trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the mountains. "I just want to build something that lasts. Something quiet, something true." Ilara swallowed hard. "You have?" Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. Not velvet, not new, just simple, like everything about him. He opened it to reveal a silver pendant, delicate hand-worked, with a single faint inscription on the inside. She recognized the script immediately. It was her grandmother's handwriting. Somehow, he'd taken a line from an old journal she'd once left on the kitchen table and had it etched. "Find your truth in the wild." Ilara's breath caught. Caleb didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at her, his eyes full of quiet, raw honesty. "I haven't loved in years," he said softly, "and I didn't think I ever would again. Not like this. Not where it mattered." Ilara blinked back tears. "I don't need a grand gesture," he added. "I don't need a crowd. I just need you and the sound of your footsteps on the porch every morning." She laughed through the tears, then nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." Caleb slipped the pendant around her neck. It felt like it had always been waiting for her. They sat there while longer as the night crept in, the stars blinking into view one by one. No fanfare, no flash, just two people quietly, completely choosing each other. After all the noise, after the fighting, after the long road of grief and guarded hearts, they had come home, and this time they would stay. 1 year later, the peaks of Whispering Peaks Ranch were more vibrant than they had been in decades. A generous spring thaw had rolled through, coaxing wildflowers out of the hard-packed earth and swelling the mountain streams. Herd animals roamed the high pastures, their coats gleaming in the sun. Laughter rang from the old lodge. Children's voices, light and full of life. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a refuge. Ilara stood on the porch, a sleeping infant tucked against her chest in a woven wrap. Her daughter, Lyra, had her father's steady brow and her mother's quiet stubbornness. The baby stirred slightly as Ilara watched a group of teenagers learn wilderness survival skills under the guidance of 2 seasoned volunteers. Across the field, Caleb walked beside a boy of about 10, holding the lead of a patient pack mule. He moved more slowly now, not from age, but from purpose, like every step mattered. The boy laughed at something Caleb said, and Caleb ruffled his hair. This was what they had built. After the storm of Marcus's downfall and the court battles that followed, the community had come together. People Ilara never imagined would stand in the same room, now work side by side. The ranch became a non-profit wilderness therapy center, offering programs for veterans, at-risk youth, and families who had lost too much. Caleb never put his name on anything. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to give back. Ilara walked down the porch steps, careful with Lyra's head tucked beneath her hand. Caleb saw her from across the corral and smiled. That quiet, easy smile that still undid her every time. "Morning, Mrs. Thorne," he called. "You're late for breakfast, Mr. Thorne." He met her halfway, kissing her forehead gently before peeking at the sleeping baby. "She's out cold, like her father after a long trail build." Caleb chuckled. "Fair." They walked together, the golden light warming the earth around them. A sign creaked softly near the entrance of the ranch, freshly sanded and lovingly repainted. It was mounted to the original post her father had put up decades ago, the new name carved deep in the wood. "Thorn Ridge, where we come back to life." Caleb looked at it and let out a slow breath. "Think your dad would have liked it?" Ilara nodded. "He would have liked you." Caleb's eyes softened. "Took me long enough to earn that." She reached for his hand. "You earned it the moment you stayed." They stood there a while, watching the wind roll through the hills. Their daughter pressed warm between them, the ranch alive with sound and spirit. They had lost much, but they had built more, not with steel or gold or power, but with love, with truth, with a quiet decision to keep choosing each other day after day, no matter how the world turned. As the sun rose over Thorn Ridge, Elara looked up at Caleb and smiled. "Let's ride," she whispered. He nodded, and together, with Lyra tucked safe against her mother's chest, they saddled 2 horses and rode slowly up the ridge trail toward the same hilltop where Caleb had once watched the land, alone, thinking he would never belong again. But now at the top, he looked down not as a drifter or a ghost of who he'd been, but as a husband, a father, a man who had come back to life, exactly where he was meant to be. Sometimes the most powerful love stories are not born from grand gestures or perfect beginnings, but from broken pieces, rebuilt slowly with steady hands and quiet hearts. Caleb and Elara didn't just find each other. They found healing, purpose, and the kind of home that cannot be bought, only built. Because love, real love, is not about who you were. It's about who you choose to become together.